Hey everybody, welcome to my review celebrating 500 videos uploaded to YouTube. This is Gothic 3 for PC. Now this game was subject to a lot of really unfortunate circumstances. It was extremely buggy on release, pretty unfinished, and that was mostly the publisher's fault for making them release it in that state. But it was released to horrible reviews due to the bugs, and it was also released the same year as Oblivion. So everybody got that game instead and said, "Oh, this game is amazing, it's the best role-playing game ever," when it's not really a role-playing game, it's an action game with role-playing elements. But Gothic 3 was an actual role-playing game, and outside of the Gothic community, it really didn't see a lot of love. I mean, in fact, the Gothic community even hates it. For a lot of Gothic fans just despise Gothic 3, and it's kind of sad to see that. This is where Piranha Bytes lost control of the license. They developed this game, it was released, and then they couldn't make any more Gothic games for quite a while. They're supposedly going to be getting the license back soon, so hopefully that'll help. But that's why you had the massive failures of Gothic 3 Forsaken Gods, as well as Arcania Gothic 4. But is this game really as bad as people seem to think it is? Well, in the visual department, it's certainly not lacking. The environments are absolutely gorgeous. I mean, yes, it's kind of a generic medieval Europe kind of thing, but there's a lot of vibrancy. There's a lot of color. The greens are really bright. You look out at the ocean and you're like, whoa, that looks great. There's a really accurate day and night cycle, too, so that really does influence it. And the lighting, especially, is just phenomenal. That said, character modeling sucks. People look just terrible in this game, especially the faces. They look really weird and lumpy. The characters themselves, the people, just look really awkward and like they're misshapen. It's really bizarre. Animations are smooth, but they're kind of sluggish looking. They don't really look realistic. I mean, it's no big deal. You get used to it after a while. But still, that's not very pleasing. It's really the environment that draws you in, though. It just looks absolutely phenomenal. And in the sound department, it's kind of all over the place. The sound effects themselves really just do their job, and that's it. They're really not that noticeable. I mean, it sounds like you're kind of hitting things. It sounds like you're just knocking things around, that sort of thing. But like the rest of the Gothic games, the voice acting is absolutely horrendous, and it's really pathetic. I mean, it's better than Gothic 1's at least. It's about on par with Gothic 2, I'd say. It's a little bit, maybe a little better, but it's still horrible, and it really is just kind of, you sit there laughing at the characters more than you sympathize with their plights and such. And then there's the music, which is excellent. It's really bombastic orchestral stuff, and I believe they released a soundtrack along with the game in the Collector's Edition, and they released the soundtrack for sale, I believe, as well. It's great stuff. Really nice, kind of epic-sounding music that really fits in well, as well as this atmospheric music that really kind of draws you in as well. But really, it's the story and the gameplay that matter most in a role-playing game. And unfortunately for Gothic 3, the story is pretty awful. But that's to be expected. It is a Piranha Bytes game. They've never been particularly great at writing stories. They're really good at writing settings, and that's what really shines here. But the story itself is basically you're the nameless hero that was the protagonist in Gothic 1 and 2. And this time you've gone to mainland Murtana with your buddies, and you found that the orcs have basically conquered the human kingdom and have basically kind of enslaved the populace. At least that's the impression you get. But then you go and you explore the towns more, and you find that it's really not as they say it is. It's not just these horrible orcs treading all over us. They actually bring somewhat some sense of order to the world, and they actually do kind of save the humans from themselves almost. It's really interesting to see that. And that's part of what shines about this game. The setting is phenomenal. It's just the storyline itself is really weak. It's basically you go and you liberate, I put this in quotes, liberate, the humans from the orcs the entire game. That's pretty much it. And it's really weird that way because it's just the way it plays out is just awkward and just doesn't seem right for a Gothic game, so to speak. But then you go to the gameplay aspect itself, and it's still very much a Gothic game. They did considerably improve the interface to the point where I just really applaud them for it. The interface in Gothic 1 and 2 was just horrible, to say the least. Keyboard only, you had to go through a grid pattern to get what you needed to get. It was just really unintuitive, really awkward to get used to, and ultimately it would get you killed more often than not. Gothic 3, interface is mouse-based, and on top of that, it's got menus. So it's really easy to navigate. It's really easy to find what you need to do. And Gothic fans hated that for some weird reason. They're like, oh, this is horrible. Well, you can stick with your ass-backwards keyboard stuff for all I care, because the interface itself is just massively improved over Gothic 1 and 2. As for the combat, they did change it up a little bit. It still plays pretty much the same as Gothic 1 and 2, but they've put in a stamina bar, so if you attack too much, then you actually get out of breath. If you sprint too much, you get out of breath. And that does actually have quite a bit of a detriment to you, because then you basically can't fight back. And that's pretty problematic. What they did do wrong with the combat is they made it possible to get enemies into essentially infinite combos, where you just keep wailing on them endlessly until they drop dead. And that's a little bit of a problem, but it's only if you're fighting one person at a time. If you're trying to take on groups, then you are going to get your ass handed to you. It's that simple, because the game still very much emphasizes that you should only fight things one-on-one, and then only if you know what you're doing, and only if you have proper gear and stats and such. And so the difficulty early on is very, very high, whereas when you get to the end game, it's less difficult, but it's still pretty challenging. And Gothic fans thought it was too easy. I don't know what's wrong with these people. These are the same people who thought Gothic 2 was too easy. And it's like, what's wrong with you people? The Gothic games are difficult. And, well, for most players, they're really difficult. For Gothic fans, they're way too easy. It's really pathetic. But, the systems that really worked in the Gothic series, they've kept. I mean, they still have that really robust, really interesting crafting system that works out really, really well. They still have all the resource gathering and such. They still have the faction-based gameplay where you can choose to side with one faction or the other, and you get different bonuses and such for doing that. And armor is faction-based this time around, so you do actually have to get on good terms with any given faction in order to get the best armors. And that's a really interesting way of doing things, because you actually can kind of get infamy or fame with each faction. And it almost reminds me of the way Fallout New Vegas handled things in terms of the factions. And I think they might have gotten the inspiration from Gothic. But it works surprisingly well. It's really interesting to see just how the different factions play out. And it's really the setting that keeps you going the most of the time, because it's really interesting to just run around and explore. And the game does reward you quite a bit for exploring. If you find something and it's guarded, there's something good in there. You may not know what it is, but there is something that's really good in there. And if you go in there and you defeat whatever that guard is, and you find that thing, there's just a really good sense of satisfaction for getting that thing. Like, say you go into a cave and you find it's overrun with tons of bandits. You kill all the bandits after a great deal of difficulty. You go in and you get all their loot, and it's like, oh yes, this is awesome. And so the game does provide quite a bit of character progression. It provides this sense of satisfaction throughout the game whenever you find something cool. And there's different ways of attacking situations. You can try to talk your way out of things if you want to. And in that regard, it is very much a role-playing game. It really does emphasize just that you get to play the way you want to play it. And that's a great thing. And the way it does it is just phenomenal. They've really improved the skill system especially. Now, I do think it's kind of annoying to have certain weapons restricted to if you have certain levels of skill with this type of weapon. But you get used to it, and it's no big deal, because the skill system just explains things really well, and that's another thing that this game does extremely well. It explains what you're doing. If you go into like the skills and such, and you go into, say, the weapons, it tells you basically word for word what the weapon does, what the skill does, etc. Explains how it works, all this stuff, and it works really well. So personally, I think it's just a massive improvement over the previous two Gothic games. Maybe not in the storyline, but in the gameplay itself, it's just phenomenal. Despite being able to get enemies stuck in infinite combos, which really only helps you if you're fighting one enemy at a time, like I said. So, really, it's just really impressive to sit there and play through this game, and note how far the Gothic series has come since Gothic 1, and how much of an improvement this is over Gothic 1 and 2 in terms of gameplay. But I know a lot of Gothic fans hate it. I don't know why. I'll never understand these people. They're mind-boggling. But I think Gothic 3 is a phenomenal game. Gets a 4 out of 5. Thanks for watching.